Stop that incestuous racket! Today we are going to open our books to page 394. Miss Granger, must you always be in such an insufferable know-it-all? Now, as a punishment for Miss Granger, not only will Gryffindor lose 10 points, but they will also write a 3 parchment paper talking about the distinguishing differences between an anogamous and a werewolf. Now, as I was saying, get back to page 394.
Oh, Severus, perhaps I may interrupt and teach this class. I think it would be a little bit easier. Today, children, we are going to talk about graphing and coordinate planes as it pertains to math and to geography. So first, we will start with math and what we already know about graphing. We first separate our graphs into quadrants. These quadrants, or qua meaning four, will be split apart into 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I use the x-axis to separate from left to right. My apology, children. I haven't used spelling parchment in quite some time. This muggle world is so odd. The x-axis is this axis going here. We could say it's a line, but in fact it appears to be two rays with an origin point. So this end point and then going on to our positive numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then another ray going the opposite direction, which we will call these the same distance. However, we must distinguish them from the others. So perhaps we can use negative signs. So these negative numbers. We're also going to do this with the y-axis. The y-axis goes from the top and the bottom, dividing the graph, or in this case, paper. And we will also have positive numbers going up and then negative numbers going down. This, dear children, is the x-axis and the y-axis. The next thing we're going to talk about is this whole thing, this surface we would call the coordinate plane. A plane is basically a surface. You may understand there's the plane of the Muggle world, and then there's the plane of the magical world. They cross over quite a bit. But then we have things like the spiritual plane or the ethereal plane or other planes where magic and beasts and Doctor Strange live. Those are different planes. For us, we're just talking about the two. Later in school, you will add the Z plane or axis. My apologies. The Z axis. But for right now, we're not going to discuss that. I'm sorry, Z. But no, not today. So when I have my X and Y axis, I could further break those into coordinates or ordered pairs. These are ordered pairs. Pairs meaning two, not a pear like this, the fruit, We are not talking about you again. Sorry, Pear. Nothing personal. I'm actually a big fan of pears, but that's another story. So our ordered pair is in order alphabetically X and then Y. Again, as you get older, you can enjoy adding the Z axis, which will give you depth. But again, we are not. So I have my ordered pair X and Y. These are exact positions which I would add to a graph. If, for instance, I choose this spot, I would first go over 1, 2, 3, comma, and then down 1 and 2, giving this the address of 3, -2 for this spot, -2 and 3. That, children, is how you find coordinates. And when it has this address, we call that a coordinate. So again, the X will be the first coordinate, the Y the second. The only other point I want to bring up is this, the point of origin. The origin point is always 0 and 0 because we're on this line of X, which is 0, and we're on this line of Y, which is 0. Where they intersect in the center, that is our origin. That is where we start our graph. You may choose that spot wherever you draw the intersecting lines, but wherever they intersect will be the origin. Oh, yes. Now, let's talk about geometry. I'm sorry, geography. Geography. These spectacles are rather clouded up. Let me erase. Using my magic powers of an eraser, I will erase. Bibbidi bobbidi boo, I believe is the magic command. Oh, sorry, the wrong movie. Maybe it's Erasamos. Erasamos. Yes, yes, that worked quite nicely. Now, how does all this tie to geography? Geography, goodness sakes. Let's say I have a map, which is really a plane. It is flat. It has no depth. And I add on to this plane the same things. I add this graph showing two lines, the X axis and the Y. But in geography, I do not call them that. In fact, what I do call them is meridians when they're going up and down, and this one is the center, which we call the prime meridian. It is here in jolly old England. I believe you spell it Greenwich, England. That is where the 0 point or line is, the y-axis. Now, the other one you may also be familiar with, and we call that the equator. The equator is also the x-axis, but on the Earth we call it the equator. The equator is 0 as well, just like the prime meridian, but we call this degrees, 0 degrees. And where they cross is also an origin point. And it's a real spot off the coast of Africa. Dear children, it exists, but it's in the water, in the Atlantic Ocean. So I take these ideas and concepts and further them. So to make a grid of the entire map, I add more meridians. These meridians on a map go from north to south. On a Mercator projection, they appear to be parallel. They are parallel lines. So I would call this 10 and this 10, this 20 and this 20, this 30 and this 30. How do I recognize then which is which, since we don't use negative numbers? Well, the way I do that is separating the quadrants. This would be the northern half of the Earth. This would be the southern half of the Earth. And we call halves hemispheres. So I've now separated it from north and south, but also I will separate it west and east. So I have northwest quadrant and the southwest, the southeast and the northeast. These are how I separate or identify places instead of using negative numbers. So, for instance, if I was talking about Argentina, which is in South America, I would describe this as the Western Hemisphere, and this is a continent which we call then South America. Now, dear children, there is a little glitch to that idea because this is a continent and some of the continent is actually above the equator. In fact, the equator goes through a country called Ecuador. But we're not going to concern ourselves with that right now. But just be aware. Same with North America. Even though some of North America is what we would call Central America, it is still in the Northern Hemisphere, as is some of South America's continent. When we refer to North America, though, we refer to, in general, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. We refer to the center as Central America or the Caribbean islands. Let's take a pause here. Mr. Weasley and I were going to share some chocolate frogs. I'm hoping I get a good card. Please pause your tape. Ah, children, I think I got a toe in my chocolate frog. Terrible, terrible little creatures. Very good. We're back on our map again. We're going to quickly restate things. We have our equator, which we talked about, is the x-axis. We also have our y, which we call the prime meridian. Now, as we divide this further, we have more meridians, which we talked about a minute ago. And these meridians have degrees going from 0, 20, 40, 60. Of course, children, every number is correct. They don't just go by 20s. But these are all west, 40 degrees west, 20 degrees west. If I go with my meridians to the east, then I describe it as 60 degrees east. But we also have more parallels. And these are lines or rings that go around the Earth to give the graph the x-axis. So these we call parallels, and they are always parallel lines on any kind of map or on the Earth itself. Parallels, we remember, never intersect. Not even for you, Harry. There we go. So we have our origin point, which is 0. We could pick a spot here, which we could define as 10, 20 degrees north, comma, and then 10, 20, 30 degrees west. That would give us this point or coordinate, but in geography, we don't call it coordinates, we call it location. And when we use coordinates, this is an exact location or absolute location. It is absolutely right at this point. And as we have added GPS from the Muggle world, we could now identify these points very accurately. This might be 20.798345. Very accurate north. We call that hours, minutes, and seconds when we describe it. But let's add some more to this. And let's answer the question, which is most important, which is why? Why does this go to 90? Why do we put this location in first or second? How did they come up with these numbers? Why does one go to 90 for north and south, but for east and west it goes to 180? And that, children, I will ask you again to pause before we start. So to answer that question, we must first start with the Earth, which is not flat. It is round like a sphere. In fact, it is a sphere. And so at the top and the bottom, we have poles. One is the North Pole. Talk about magic. The other is the South Pole, which of course has penguins. Their little flappy arms. And of course, at the North Pole, well, they have a jolly old elf. But that's another story as well. So we're going to add our meridians. And those meridians curve around the Earth. If you think of them as sections, oh dear. If you think of them as sections of an orange, it will give you a good example. So if I look at my orange and cut it in half and look at the top or the Earth, I pick a center point, the origin point, straight down is the prime meridian. Merlinian is a different story of magic. That is 0 degrees. As I go around, I now have 2, 3, 4, up to 90 degrees. Where do I get the term degrees? Well, I'm glad you asked, children. If you think about this angle, which goes between these two spots from the center, it is 90 degrees, in fact, and we would call that a right angle. There's another one here, but we would call this a straight line, which is 180 degrees. But children, it wouldn't make sense for this to be 359 degrees east, when if I was standing here and went this direction 1 degree, it would only be 1 degree west. So we split the earth in half. This side, again, is east. This side is west. So this spot here would be 90 degrees west. This 90 degrees east. And the word degree comes from this angle that we would make from the center of the earth and the prime meridian. So now let's talk about the equator and how we only go to 90 for that part. We need another globe or sphere. That sphere is a little different. This sphere is the earth. However, I am going to dig down to the center of the earth. That's my beard and my hat, Harry. And I'm going to hold a protractor and stand exactly straight. This line is the equator. And I'm going to line up my protractor on the equator. And then I'm going to look straight up to the sky, to the North Pole. And at the North Pole, of course, I'm going to measure this. And it is, in fact, again, a 90-degree angle, Harry. Now, what if I look behind me, Harry? I turn around and line this up, and then I look up at Santa again. Yes, it would still be a 90-degree angle. Well, what if I look down? I was looking at penguins. This angle again, 90 degrees, Harry. So, as we recall our quadrants, north, west, north, east, south, east, and southwest. Well, now we are only worried about the direction north or south. So, if I was standing right here in Denver, I would look up and see that it is perhaps 48 degrees north, and perhaps 1, 2, 3, perhaps 140 degrees west. So I now have this location, this absolute location, which is also a coordinate on our maps. Thank you, Harry. Thank you for listening. I hope this explains everything to you. Please let your friends Ron and Hermione know. It is just that simple. And that's why we call them degrees, because of these angles. I did spell equator wrong. I'm so sorry, Harry.
I may have had too many vacations and forgot my spelling, although I will admit I'm not a great speller. Equator. There we go. Okay, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Please contact your teachers for more information. And, as always, subscribe and leave a comment in your muggle voice.